Welcome back to the Razor Sharp Report on Bold Like a Leopard, and I'm hoping that you're going to have a happy Thanksgiving if you're listening to this the week before that, or you did already have with Happy Thanksgiving. If later, please take time to go to the link tree in the description and subscribe to me on Rumble, BitChute, and Odyssey. Those are the three video hosting sites that are alternatives to YouTube. You'll get my notifications right away whenever a video posts. And all my other social media sites are on there, including Truth Social, and I also have Minds, Gab, and Substack, and I think the last one, Getter. Yeah, so I have all of those on there. The topic today, we're going to respond to a couple critics of mine on Ukraine, and I've actually tried to record a number of different versions of this, but each time the situation changes a little bit. So forgive me if I haven't addressed it before, but this time I think there's been some significant news that I do want to discuss, because I'm not going to make anyone happy on either side. Also, I'm going to discuss the issue of the special counsel that is investigating President Trump, as well as the House committees that are going to be investigating the Biden administration under the new Republican leadership in Congress, and we'll see what else I get to. Quickly though, let's get to the issue of Ukraine. So this was an episode that happened last week, and some people were saying, oh, is World War III about to start? Even Fox News, to be clear, I think a lot of these news companies, they don't actually care about the true situation. They want the headline. And I think within a few hours of this missile that had been fired from Ukraine, hitting Poland and killing 2 civilians, people knew that it wasn't actually a Russian missile. And yet there were a number of people who were saying, well, it looks like Russia might have attacked Poland in order to precipitate a wider conflict in Europe. Now, I was listening yesterday to the Ron Paul Liberty Report with, and Congressman Paul was not on the podcast, but one of his big collaborators, Daniel McAdams, was hosting, and he was also speaking with the guest Phil Giraldi. And this is one of the big areas where I break with Ron Paul, because while I agree with the concept of a non-interventionist foreign policy, a lot of the people who present it are actually terrible spokespeople for it. They often traffic in stuff that is actually real disinformation or innuendo or simply rumors or speculation. And one of the people that does that the most is Phil Giraldi, who I actually think is, I don't know what his motive is, and I can't say for sure that it's malevolent, but this isn't the first time. He's been like this for decades. He's one of the people who believes in Israel doing 9/11, for example, and has never been able to actually make a case for it. And he's a former CIA agent, and one of the reasons that I don't trust him is because while he's a former CIA agent and he says he's a non-interventionist, and he also says that he supports the liberty movement, I don't really know, that he's ever talked about his career with the CIA in detail, and talked about the dirty stuff that they did in the CIA. And the reason I think that would be a real issue is because he served in places like Turkey and Italy, where the CIA did a lot of very dirty things, and yet he's never spoken about anything related to those theaters of the Cold War. So, but why am I just talking about Philip Giraldi, just attacking the source? Well, the reason is because on this podcast, they were basically behaving as if Ukraine had conspired for this to happen, that they had deliberately fired a missile into Poland in order to draw Russia into a war with NATO, and to blame it on Russia. And the facts don't point to that. The facts point to a Russian missile being fired at Ukraine, and the Ukrainian missile being fired to intercept theirs and landing in Poland. And it's a tragic circumstance, and it's an accident, and I can simultaneously say that Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, should be castigated heavily for trying to use this incident in order to draw the U.S. and NATO into a wider conflict. There should be consequences for this. And at the same time, I don't believe in all the nonsense where they're saying that this was premeditated. I think that this was an incident where Ukrainian government officials, including Zelensky, decided, well, this happened, we might as well use it to our advantage. And I think it shows plainly that this is a conflict we shouldn't be involved in. Look, I've been consistent my entire time doing YouTube or writing, making videos, doing all those things. I don't just make videos on YouTube. That's why I make that distinction. So again, the alt tech, please click in the link tree below. But you need to understand this. I've been consistently against U.S. interventionism abroad and foreign aid to any of our allies. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who it is. And I've gotten a lot of flack over the years from people who say that I am an isolationist. That there's people who say that I'm anti-Israel because of it. There's people that say I'm pro-Russian because of it. There's people that say I'm some sort of right-wing fanatic, or that I'm actually a closet communist because of it. But the reality is, I believe that ending foreign aid commitments from the U.S. isn't just a fiscal issue. It's an issue of determining that our foreign policy should be geared towards trade and good relations with the other countries overseas. There are people who tell me, and they say this with a straight face, they say the United States needs to be the policeman of the world. We can't trust the world to run its own affairs. We need a country out there that will basically force other countries to follow the rules. That is an empire, and I am never going to support that. It's not a sustainable model, first of all. Those countries will never be able to repay the debt that America owes them financially. I'm not talking, forget about repaying them in terms of supporting them in times of need. Now, you have to think about it. During the war on terror, there were a few countries that contributed, including Poland, by the way. They contributed forces to the war in Iraq. And, we should be, I guess, grateful in a way that they decided that they will stand with the United States against terror or in the war in Iraq. But think about it. The U.S. got involved in a war in Iraq that was pointless, and we drew other countries into that war. And this is the obverse situation here. We're having a war in Europe where the Ukrainians and the Russians are at each other's throats. I do concede that in this case, Russia is the clear aggressor, and everything they've been doing against Ukraine has been both wrong and illegal and clearly abusive and murderous. If you look at the way that they've been firing rockets at population centers, destroying civilian infrastructure, a lot of people try to wave it off and say, well, Russia, they're actually trying to minimize the amount of damage by targeting civilian infrastructure and not target civilians. But look, I see through this a lot. And look, the Russian case for going to war is predicated on the fact that they're mad that Ukraine isn't part of their buddy network. And that's not a legitimate case for war, in my opinion. So I can't, in good conscience, support a Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? So it doesn't matter what Putin's justification for it is. I would have to then think about all the other times that another country one country has invaded another country, and it's been for pointless reasons. And think about the Falklands War, right? Most international observers nowadays would say the Falklands War was unjustified. Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, and they decided, well, this is actually Argentinian territory. You got to get out. And there was no real international law that they were enforcing. They were simply doing it because they believed that the UK did not belong in the Falkland Islands. And in that case, the British were strong enough to wrest back control of the Falklands. So I think that Ukraine, in terms of their justification for fighting, they're in the right, but they're not justified in requesting all of this aid and continuing the conflict ad nauseum. And the American and other NATO allies are not justified in continuing to encourage them to fight for every inch of land. And why do I say that? Because unlike it with the Falklands War, this isn't a war that I believe will end with a just solution. Unfortunately, we're up against, if we're talking about the West, we're up against a nuclear power. We're also seeing major hardships caused by this war that are not necessarily related to its actual fighting, but really to issues like grain harvests and the supply chain shortages and the world oil economy and whatever. So the real solution should have been to end this war as soon as possible. The best solution, of course, would have been to find a way for it never to have happened at all. And I think that the Biden administration bungled that severely. They did things like give concessions to Russia without any actual warranting of concessions before an actual solution was found. For example, they canceled certain sanctions against Russian interests prior to the war on the condition that Russia would not invade Ukraine. And yet Russia did end up invading Ukraine. I also am tired of this whole debate over whether Ukraine is whether they should be a good ally of the U.S. or not because of their past and certain associations with Nazi Germany or whatever. I don't really care about that. And in fact, I'm inclined to say that Ukraine should be able to do whatever they want in terms of their internal politics, but we shouldn't be involved in it. And a lot of this interventionism is the product of the Obama administration and the Bush administration getting us involved. They're having us deliver all sorts of different types of encouragement. I think in the form of funding to certain Ukrainian opposition groups, and later supporting these governments in their struggle against Russia. America has gotten Ukraine deeper into this conflict than it had to be. What should have been the policy would be that we would have good relations with Ukraine, and we wouldn't really have any hand in how it relates to Russia to begin with. And therefore, I don't think that Russia would have really decided to do things like invade Crimea to begin with. Now, look, this isn't something that's easy for Ukraine supporters to swallow, because they believe a lot of these governments that were in power, for example, the Yanukovych government, that they made Ukraine a puppet of Russia. But that's not America's business to sort out. It just isn't. Okay, there's a lot of terrible geopolitical situations out there. People are unaware that there's a massive civil war in Ethiopia that doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. They're unaware that we're continuing to be involved in a very bloody civil war in Yemen. But they don't care because it doesn't make the headlines. The media does not cover it. But yeah, I'm very concerned about the situation in Ukraine. And no, I'm not on either side, and I don't believe in these conspiracy theories that Ukraine they set up this missile attack in order to... No, I think they took advantage of the situation, which is bad enough itself. You don't have to concoct ridiculous conspiracy. This is a conspiracy theory, to be clear. Okay, because I'm sorry that I have to use the term, because I'm usually saying that, don't just call it a conspiracy theory and dismiss it. No, I believe this was. I think that they did. That Phil Giraldi is trying to pretend that he's in the know when he's not. And now maybe one day he'll be proven right, but I have no reason to think that, because he's never been proven right about any of the other idiotic theories that he's put out. And in fact, this is one of the reasons that he can only be published by a place like Un's Review, which is they have stupid papers up there about how, from people who are out and out racists like him, which Ron Paul Liberty Report should probably know by now. They have papers up by people who claim that the Uyghurs are white people, and that's why we should fight for China against China because that's their reasoning. Because in some way, some Uyghurs, they happen to look European, so they think that China is abusing white people. So they have stuff like that up on the UN's review because they don't care. They'll publish any piece of crap that somebody writes, that they make an argument that's cogent even if it doesn't make any real sense. So enough about that. Down that little tangent into Uyghur land. So what's going on with these investigations in Congress? Okay, there's going to be a number of probes by the Oversight Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and other House committees that are going to look into Biden administration wrongdoing. Hopefully also looking into the COVID-19 pandemic and the disinformation that was put out by people like Anthony Fauci. Now, I wanted to make it clear that I think these committees, the information that they're going to be revealing is important work, but nothing's going to happen because of it. And this is a reminder of what occurred during the Obama administration with the Benghazi hearings. The Benghazi revealed that, yeah, the State Department and Hillary Clinton specifically, yeah, they're behaving as if they can do whatever they want, and they don't have to actually, first of all, they don't have to actually do their job correctly because there's no accountability. What happened in Benghazi was a real scandal, and what Hillary Clinton did, where she basically ignored distress calls and allowed this attack to happen, and she ignored concerns from the people dispatched to Benghazi and sent them anyway into their deaths. Yeah, that's a real scandal. But the problem is that the American people didn't have to care about it because, number one, they have a very short attention span. I notice, for example, nowadays that people don't even look at Patriot Day, which is 9/11, and really look at it as a real memorial holiday. They generally don't even pay attention. People will schedule events and happy occasions on 9/11. They don't really seem to care. And the same thing, by the way, the Benghazi attack happened on 9/11. So all of the scandals surrounding the Benghazi attack went over with very little real attention from the American people because, for one thing, it was an election year and Barack Obama was able to win largely because of his successful response to Hurricane Sandy. So this issue was something that was a serious issue that the American people ignored because ultimately it got washed out of the news cycle. It got washed down the drain. So people didn't have this issue at the top of their list of priorities when the election came along, or during the next few years when the Republicans were investigating Obama and Clinton over Benghazi. But it was a real scandal, and the fact that the Clinton administration was trying to attribute the blame for the Benghazi attack falsely to a YouTube video by a person who had very little production value, and also, from what I understand, it didn't actually get that many views. It shows just how craven and unscrupulous Hillary Clinton was, and how unscrupulous the people like the National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, were. These were people who they were willing to say and do anything to deflect the blame from themselves. The fact is that the Benghazi hearings didn't succeed in really moving the needle in America because a lot of people didn't care, and that's the unfortunate truth. You can have major problems in American society, and people ultimately, they don't actually pay attention because they're not in this in order to they're not in politics in order to actually see productive results. They're in it in order to see the results that are according to their worldview. For example, in this past election, this is something I really wanted to talk about. A lot of people who know that the economy is doing terribly, they know that their livelihood is being undermined, and they know that they are not going to be able to afford to retire. They voted anyway for the Democrats, who they're probably more responsible for this than the Republicans. They're both responsible, but the Democrats are definitely more responsible because they encourage runaway spending and printing of money. But they still voted for the Democrats in many cases because either they hate Donald Trump or they believe that abortion is some sort of supreme right that has to be fought for, like it's the, like it's the shrine of the shroud of Turin. Like that's their approach to abortion. That it's so important that it trumps the real material needs and necessities. That's the warped thinking of a lot of voters. So that's one of the reasons I think that investigating Dr. Fauci, while it's important information, and I'll applaud when it does happen, and Jim Jordan does call these people to the carpet and says, why is it that you did lie to the people about this? Why is it, for example, that you were telling the public for a long time that herd immunity would be achieved at 80%, and then once they were closing in on 80%, you adjusted upward to above 90%, and then the only reason you gave was because you didn't think the public would respond according to, he didn't think basically that people were ready for the truth. So he told them a lie, and then he adjusted the lie when it became convenient. And this was something that I remember on CNN they were actually uncomfortable with. So I think it's important that they do investigations on Anthony Fauci, and they do the investigation on the Hunter Biden laptop and on all of these officials that went on the record in a letter and said that it was Russian disinformation, when in fact it was not Russian disinformation. Yesterday there was this hilarious situation where CBS News confirmed that the entire thing was real. Okay, this is already after the Washington Post has confirmed it. So at this point, why is it that these officials are able to show their faces and actually pretend that they are people that should be paid attention to? The reason is because the media will not hold them accountable. That's not their job. Their job is to hold accountable only the people that are not on their side. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, to look at the other side. I think it should be a clear signal as to whether you should watch Fox News that they actually have Geraldo Rivera on there. The man was never a serious journalist. He's a person who was openly into gonzo tactics, doing things like the Al Capone's vault and the Satanic Panic and things like that. The fact that Geraldo Rivera continues to have a career in the news in any way, shape, or form, it doesn't matter that it's as a commentator on Sean Hannity's show. It's really a black mark on Fox News, and people should be aware of issues like that rather than just trust these networks. So moving on, these committees are not going to get much done. I think this is one of the reasons I tell people you should be worried more about looking at ways to safeguard your own livelihood in this difficult economy, and I think people should be looking into precious metals. There's all sorts of different vendors out there, and I, for example, and this is just friendly advice, so I'm not telling you to go there, I'm not giving you financial advice, but this is friendly advice. I usually use the SD Bullion site, and there's a number of other ones like Bullion Max. You should be able to hold it in your hand and not have to think that when a real crisis happens, you have to retrieve it from some sort of safe storage place. So to talk about the economy for a brief second, this whole crypto meltdown is going to get worse. It's just a matter of time, by the way, that before some of these big Bitcoin institutions are going to melt down, because like the larger financial institutions are going to pull out their stakes. I do think that, for example, the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, which I hear a lot about in the Peter Schiff podcast, it is going to go bankrupt, and so will a number of these other exchanges. Binance is probably not doing too well. Coinbase, which I used to have money on, and I don't really use that much anymore. I never really got deep into crypto. They're all probably treading water right now and looking very worriedly at the price of crypto day to day, and it's actually dipped to the 15,000 level. That was that's a new 52-week low for Bitcoin, at least. So what's going to happen is that every company that is crypto-based, where a lot of the employees are holding their stakes in crypto, once those companies go bankrupt and have to lay off all their employees, you're going to see the crypto price continue to slump, because they're going to be cashing in their Bitcoin holdings, because they're going to be on unemployment. They might have lifestyles that they can't live on unemployment and be sustainable with. So they're going to cash in their Bitcoin, and that's going to tank that metric even further, their Bitcoin or whatever other crypto that they're using. So this is an industry that's ripe for implosion. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that at this point. So I am encouraging people that that first of all is sort of a good model for what we could be seeing in the economy as a whole soon. And that's why I do think you need something that has intrinsic value. So I do encourage you to at least look at precious metals. I'm not going to tell you when or how or what to buy, because I can't, but just think about it. So getting back to the topic of the political realm, okay, so the Republicans are disadvantaged with these committees because they don't really have any bite, and any criminal referrals they make will have to be going through the Justice Department or other federal agencies that have investigatory authorities. And as you well know, those authorities can just sit on them and say, or they can even just say, well, okay, we take your criminal referral and it's duly noted, but this isn't in the public interest to investigate. And that's why I think having the House majority is better than not having the House majority, because you can basically play effective defense and prevent the Biden agenda from advancing, but it doesn't really do anything to put your agenda forward, because the House doesn't have any way to leverage any of its policies. Now they could force the Democrats into painful concessions in order to pass a budget. They could do things like that. That would be the most effective way to do it. But usually what happens is the Republicans seem to cave, and what we'll really be telling is whether the Republicans actually end up having Kevin McCarthy as their speaker. Now, he's been nominated to be speaker because the majority of Republican congressmen have given him their support, but he actually has to be nominated on the floor, and if enough Republicans withhold their vote from him, he won't be the speaker. And then in that case, it will probably pass on to somebody else like Steve Scalise or even Elise Stefanik, who could be the first Republican female Speaker of the House. That would be, of course, a distinction that the media won't care about, because they only care when somebody on the left does something important. But really what I'm trying to put across here is that there's no actual bite to these committees. And I think that in the Senate, the Republicans are actually in a worse situation than they were prior to this election, because yes, you could have Herschel Walker pull out a win in December against Raphael Warnock in their runoff, but that doesn't really have much effect either. You still have Mitch McConnell being able to retain his position as Senate Minority Leader, because the Republicans are in the minority. All he needs is the majority of Republicans in order to retain his position, which he already has. So yeah, I am not exactly thrilled with what's been happening politically. It looks like, for example, Lisa Murkowski, now this is something that was pretty clear when the election went down. It looks like she's going to be reelected again. And I think that any Republican who voted for Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, they have to be either brain dead or they don't actually believe in any of the so-called principles that they talk about. So she's going to win, and apparently the Democrat who's running for their House seat is going to win re-election. So yeah, I think that we're in a very terrible situation electorally, partially because of that ranked choice voting system they have there in Alaska, which, by the way, I believe they're supposed to expand to Nevada. And I personally think that ranked choice voting at this point is pretty clearly terrible, unless you make a clear choice that you can't have people from multiple parties running in the same election. There has to be one person per party, and the other people who claim to vote Republican have to vote, or Democrat for that matter, they have to run as something else. Otherwise, who cares? The next issue I want to talk about is the special counsel. So yesterday I listened to Alan Dershowitz give his analysis of Biden's appointment of Jack Smith to be the special counsel to oversee all of the federal investigations of Donald Trump. And I think Dershowitz made a consistent statement when he said, yes, special counsel is actually a bad idea because you're appointing a prosecutor to look at a specific person. Generally, prosecutors are not meant to have one target. They're meant to investigate all criminal activity in a certain area, and usually they have to prioritize which ones are more important. So for argument's sake, they might prioritize grand larceny in an area where that's a big problem, or narcotics. So these are all issues where you have a person who is appointed to the special counsel contradicts this. Okay, he's a person who's basically like a guided missile from the government towards a person in the legal sense, and therefore Alan Dershowitz has said, yeah, this is not a good idea. He said it wasn't a good idea when it was under President Nixon, when they appointed Archibald Cox to investigate him over Watergate. And it wasn't a good idea under Clinton when they appointed an independent counsel, Robert Fisk, and then later Ken Starr, when Robert Fisk proved to be, he didn't have, I guess, the legal authority to proceed beyond where he was. So they appointed Ken Starr, and they called it a special counsel instead of an independent counsel. And it wasn't a good idea with Robert Mueller. So Dershowitz made that point. But I think it's even greater than that. The reason I think a special counsel in this case is bad news, and people shouldn't really look at it lightly, is that it effectively puts the scarlet letter on Donald Trump. Now, some people who are clear Democrats and partisans, they're going to say Donald Trump has a scarlet letter anyway. He's a terrible person, and the insurrection and blah blah blah, and grabbing people by their pussy, and all that stuff. They're going to be saying, well, he deserves a scarlet letter. But if you're a person with fair-minded attitudes, and you think that the judicial system should treat people as innocent until proven guilty, then it is terrible, because you have to understand, Biden could have this special counsel, and Merrick Garland could have this special counsel running up until Election Day, and then literally the day after that, he could say, the special counsel could, well, we didn't have anything, we're going home, here's our report, no prosecution. So they could hang it over his head the entire time. Now, they could also indict him in anticipation of the election. That would cause potentially another crisis, because you would have the prosecution of a presidential candidate that would, and a lot of the evidence, by the way, with reference to this classified document issue that happened at Mar-a-Lago, that's evidence that can't be released to the public. If he actually took information that's needed to be classified that they would decide to prosecute him on, they can't be revealed to the public, because if for some reason it can't be stored by Donald Trump at his own property, it goes without saying that it can't be viewed by the general public. So the American people would end up having to just either accept on blind faith that the evidence was real, or they would have to, I guess, decide that this is a stitch-up, that they're trying to, send him up the river for nothing, which is basically what I think is happening. But they shouldn't actually. I don't think people should believe that they're not going to indict Donald Trump. I think that they very well could. I think one of the reasons that they are deciding to have another special counsel after the failure of the Mueller special counsel is because the case would be in D.C. And if they needed to, they could get a jury that would be very amenable to convicting Donald Trump. Now, obviously you can have disqualification of jurors that are unduly biased, but in D.C. it would be very hard to find 11 unbiased or 12 unbiased jurors who would be willing to join a case regarding Donald Trump. And many of those people in D.C., I hope that you read an article that I wrote several months ago about the D.C. Concealed Carry License Review Board, because they stacked that board with basically partisan Democrats and federal employees that are beholden to the Democratic agenda and real activists. So one of the reasons I think that they're able to get away with it is because who else lives in D.C.? You have a lot of bureaucrats, you have a lot of union members, you have a lot of people who are and elected officials. You have a lot of people that have a vested interest in supporting the Democrats. This isn't because I want to say that the Republicans are just a victim and that we have to support them because they're right. This is because I think that the justice system is so broken and so incapable of being fair at this point that I don't really trust there to be a fair trial of Donald Trump under those circumstances. And you have judges that are on the courts in places like D.C., like Amy Berman Jackson, that are nakedly partisan, and they're partisan for the Democrats. So I think that the special counsel investigation is definitely bad news for Donald Trump, and it's also one of the reasons I think his nomination to be the Republican presidential candidate might actually be strengthened, because I think many people will look at this as the swamp is afraid of the Donald, and they are doing this because they're afraid that he could come to power. And people are saying this. I think that there was Bill Kristol, who was a loathsome person, actually said that you shouldn't underestimate Donald Trump's capacity to get back into power. And this is a disgusting person. Remember, this is a guy who cut his teeth as supposedly one of these national security Republicans, and he's been supporting the Biden administration lock, stock, and barrel, even with the southern border being completely open and real terrorists pouring across the border. He's 100% on board with the Biden agenda. He hasn't really objected to anything. So I do want to say that I think having Donald Trump as the nominee might not be the best choice. I'm open to voting for Donald Trump, but I have my reservations. And I would definitely prefer somebody who I think would be a better choice, who has a better record on medical freedom, who's less interventionist than Donald Trump. He wasn't the most interventionist, but he could have been less. So with that, I'm going to conclude. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me through the link below to my link tree, to all the other video hosting sites, Rumble, BitChute, Odyssey, as well as all of the social media sites, whether it's Gab, Getter, Minds, or what's the other one? I am on Twitter, by the way, but Gab, Getter, Minds, and Truth Social. So have a great day, and I'll talk to you later.